the idea to invite you, Diane, was to dig a little bit and to unpack some of the ideas that have been taken from your book, that we also, give to our students to read, Age and Dancing, Older People and Community Dance Practice, that you published in 2012. Is that right? My main interest is to examine the question of how we link the kind of specific activities that are happening, the specific of the learning, the specific of the specificity of the experience that both the facilitator and older people are experiencing in that relationship. My colleague Debbie Anthony is joining us to discuss his practice together from your own experience, and potentially that's how we're going to start with your own experience, how you got into community dance and dancing with older people.
I would describe my practice as person-centred community dance. A hospital manager once said, "Diane, you should market your practice as failure-free movement. That's why they like it, because they're not worried about getting it wrong." And I've never forgotten that. And yeah, I think it is. It's not that there's in any way a lowering of quality and all the rest of it, but it's not predicated on there being one right way of doing it. And it's like I've said before, it's about getting the fit right between what I can offer and initiate and what is likely to engage people, give them pleasure, and give them the right climate for creative expression. So yes, it's to engage people in dancing the way they want to dance, and to respect their choice not to do that. If they don't feel like it today, that's fine. That they're welcome to stay, watch whatever, and they may change their mind or they may not, but I'm not going to put any pressure on. So does that give you a kind of flavour?
Yes, yes.
And most of my practice at the moment is either with older people, intergenerational groups, or with people who want to go on and initiate sessions or lead sessions, facilitate sessions.
Lovely. I think for me, so my practice is 50%, I would say, with undergraduates, teaching dance undergraduates at the University of Winchester, and the other half is with older people in the community, which I began to do in September 2015 when I went part-time. I reduced my contract here. And I was invited to come and lead a taster class for dance for older people with a new initiative that was setting up at Salisbury Playhouse. And I was terrified. Because I'd never taught older people before. When I say older people, in their 70s and 80s, some of them. It's 60 plus, dance 60. And over this past 4.5 years, since that began, I've just enjoyed it so much, and I have learnt so much, and it has, my perceptions of older people and what they can bring and do bring, it's just astonished me. And one of the key things for me is, I loved what you said earlier about engagement, enjoyment, engagement and creative expression, because those three things were things I had written down as well.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And for me, predominantly it's about the joy of moving. And when I first began teaching the classes, it was technique, it was exercises, with a tiny little bit of improv, walk-in things. And now I would say 70% of it is creative improvisation based. I always teach a little dance, and that will be in the style or the form of whether that's contemporary, because that's my specialism, my background, but I do a little bit of Zumba, a little bit of salsa, a little bit of Lindy Hop. I've done a little bit of Irish dance with them, just flavours of things. I change the music all the time. They love my music, it's really eclectic. But for me, it's about the joy of moving, and they come to exercise and for health and well-being, but actually mostly I think they come because they love to move and express. And it's the creativity which they enjoy most, I think, and the social interaction.
Yes, that's really important.
Humour is a big part of it for me. We laugh so much, and it brings, sometimes we cry. We spoke about this earlier. We have tears of release because of certain memories that are evoked through music, perhaps. But for me, it's their bodily lived expression. It's it's lived in the body. Everything that happens to them is written in the body, and they're able to tap into those lived experiences, if you like. and I just love it. It's the joy of moving and the creative expression and the creativity, I think, for me, that has really developed and come to the fore, rather than this is a dance class to help the joints and the posture and alignment, which it is all of those things as well.
Yes.
How this kind of practice challenge the notion of ageism and facilitate the inclusion of older people in our society. So I was wondering if we could reflect on that, on the kind of potentially, what the practice bring, but what are the barriers, what are the kind of challenges that you find that are successful, could be more successful, like what do we learn with this practice that could be significant outside of, to spread it, to kind of develop, what is the need in the practice?
I find that quite exciting, to actually think about the way older people are presented in the media, and actually to challenge that through dance that we can develop. And I remember taking a group of older people, I'd done some choreography with them, it was a collaborative approach, and they performed this at a showcase, a community dance showcase, and there were performers of all ages at that. And one of the dancers overheard two teenagers talking in the car park afterwards and said, "Who would have thought old fogies could dance like that?" and both with the music that I use and the movement that I'm encouraging, I am trying to just challenge some of the arbitrary lines. I mean, some young people who go and lead dance sessions with people my age and above, they think Vera Lynn is appropriate. Yes. They think we'll use music from the Second World War. And actually, that they'd be better using stuff from when they were strutting their stuff. Or, yes, and similarly, I did a session a few weeks ago at the Royal Exchange in Manchester with a group of older people, older residents from Manchester. And it was a drop-in, I'd never met most of them before. And we used a piece of really kind of funky music, man funk it's called, and they had to actually exchange places, just walk with a bit of attitude. And they built it up. And then I said, now just pause as you're passing somebody, and they paused. And by the end of it, they were going, strutting like that. And one of the younger people that was popping his head around the door from the theatre just thought that was hilarious. And we might actually develop that.
Can echo that with, I think I mentioned it when we had a brief conversation earlier, our elders, Dance 6.0, that work with professional artists, choreographers and perform around the country, they were performing at a community dance showcase event at the Taki Morris Arts Centre in Devon. Is it Devon? Yes, I think it's Devon. Yes. They've got a piece that they're touring by Liz Aggis called Head in My Bag. And the people in there, I think the youngest is 64 and the eldest is 84. And they've got black eyes and spiky punky hair and black leather jackets on. And they've got these bags and they speak. It's quite provocative. It's very, very funny. And there was an intergenerational audience, family audience in the auditorium. And Dance It So, after they performed Head in My Bag, and they always have another piece by Leonard Cohen, which is beautiful, Dance to the End of Time. It's absolutely beautiful. But they had a standing ovation. And a lot of the audience were younger people. And they were completely won over, bowled over by the conversations that were overheard afterwards, because there is this stereotype that older people can't be so bold and...
So the stereotypes are older people can't dance, older people listen to older music, is there more that we learn from that practice actually, that we challenge, but also that, because it's also surprising, what people think about older people.
I think it's nice to do something current and that's relational to the world now.
Yes, I agree.
And I think older people don't want to keep looking back and I think they want to be of the now. And I'm just thinking, for instance, about technology as well. The assumption that we have about older people and technology, when a lot of older people are absolutely intrigued and using technology on everyday kind of basis. So we're going to be talking about choreography later on as well, but
you know, that is one of the assumptions that we can also try to challenge through dance practice. Or how do we? You know, is it something in community dance that we could also be investing more in the use of technology, for instance, because it's became a way of communicating. Yes. Using the ribbon and the scarf is one thing, but you know, can we actually widen?
All my elders, they come in with their iPhones and their iPads, and they all use social media, and sometimes they take little pictures of it, you know, and do selfies with each other, and they're very much engaged. We email them all regularly with, you know, new initiatives and new events that are happening. And some of them even do Instagram, which amazes me, which is more than what I do. I think that's why I love, they're so open to anything new. And I think if I asked them to stand on their head, they would. I mean, I wouldn't. But, you know, they're just very open. And when we do improvisation sometimes, I can't believe that some of them go on the floor and start rolling around. And I would just think, oh, well, I won't get them to go down because of all the you know, one of their favourite things they do as part of an improvisation is improvising with the wall and finding all surfaces of the body and they amaze me with what they do. They don't just rub their hand, you know, they invert and they go up, they do all sorts of really interesting things and find new ways to explore and interpret and improvise all the time.
The idea that you're working with groups that are, you know, you were mentioning some earlier, Debbie, your youngest is 64, your oldest is 84. You know, obviously within the group there's going to be a lot of differences of ability, of cognition. How do you negotiate that and you make sure that, you aim to engage everybody at a different level?
One of the things that I think helps to ease that approach is a fairly non-verbal approach to facilitating what I'm doing, because I'm not saying I don't speak, but if I am using words, if I'm using language to express ideas, then if there is somebody there who has cognitive difficulties, perhaps they've left their hearing aid in their dressing gown pocket as well, or somebody else, or they don't speak English, then they're immediately going to struggle with what I'm trying to say. Whereas actually, and I've challenged myself with this because I've led sessions in Korea and Japan where I don't speak the language. I can say thank you, but that's about it. And actually, I find that is more inclusive and more likely to engage people at the level at which they are able and willing to engage. So that's a kind of response to what you're saying.
So in one of your interviews, Diane, you used the expression leading from behind.
Yes.
Is it kind of? I thought it was a beautiful image that actually, you know, would be applicable in many contexts, not just working with older people, but in terms of pedagogy approach. And I think it also resonates with you, Debbie, and your experience of leaving an open space for differentiation between physical and mental abilities. But yeah, leading from behind, there's a quite, you know, it's quite an embodied image of being there, but, you know, a kind of quality of presence from the facilitator.
I am interested in the role of the leader and the leadership behaviour, if you like. There's a continuum, which I can leave a copy of it, a continuum of leadership behaviour called, developed by Tannenbaum and Schmidt. It was looking at the use of authority of the leader and the amount of freedom that the participants have. So at one end of the continuum we've got a very authoritarian leader who is being very directive and showing you what you're going to do, and the participants are quite passive. They might copy and that's about it. And then as you move along the continuum, the amount of control by the participants is increased and the amount of control by the leader is diminished. And so leading from behind, I'll welcome everybody, but I'm constantly looking for opportunities to share the leadership. So if, for example, we do a warm-up where I've just put a piece of music on and just say, I might have led a warm-up, but then, yes, the first thing I might do with a new group is just a rub to Buddy Holly. That'll be the day, as it gets them going. And then I'll just say, hand jive. Anybody remember a hand jive? And they'll start doing different hand jives. And that's when I'll say, right, let's just all follow Tom. And immediately I'm passing the leadership over. Now if Tom suddenly goes, then I know that I've got that wrong, but that rarely happens. And you've usually got somebody who's actually tussling to show off and tussling for the leadership with it. Well, let that person lead. And so occasionally I might just put some music on and just see what happens. I don't know if you've ever tried giving them all a duster and putting when I'm cleaning windows on. Dead cert. We've got a room full of people moving, you haven't said a word.
Excellent.
You know, and that kind of thing. So that's what I mean by leading from behind. I'm constantly watching so that I can actually pull people back. I'm watching for anything which is unsafe. I'm watching for anything innovative that I might think, oh, and I might slide over and say, if it's a more active group, I've got one piece which is they've got some very easy pedestrian movement, but it needs somebody in the centre to do something quite creative and curvy. So I'll slide over and say, in a minute, there's a change in the music. Would you mind being in the middle? So I've checked that they don't mind being the one that everybody's watching. And then I'm just, right, okay, everybody watch Debbie. Anybody who'd like to join her? And so it's leading from alongside and leading from behind. Does that give you a kind of flavour of it?
Yeah, that's really good.
I can absolutely echo that. I love it when I start leading. I always start with an improvisation, and again it's following and monitoring. I can have a plan of 15 things I might do within that in terms of an image or a word or a thought, and they will surprise me because then somebody will do something really beautiful. I go, oh Sheila, I love what, and then everybody, and I do this thing where I get them to steal a moment. So as they're improvising and moving around the space, they steal a moment from someone else and add it there. Idea. And we often do follow my leader. They'll follow me, but then and sometimes we don't know who's leading and who's following, and we do flocking and things like that.
Yes.
What I've really learned is that, and going back to your earlier question, Noyale, about options, everything is optional. So if I do, in terms of leading or me directing movement, if I've got a sequence of movement, I will have a lunge. This could be a little lunge or a big lunge. This is a turn or without a turn. And I'll always demonstrate both or three variations. And I think that's really helpful for the group, and they feel really safe and secure with that. And because I've got a lady who was in the Royal Ballet years ago, and I've got other people who've never done a dance step until they came to me. So it's quite a number of levels within the group, I would say, cognitively and physically, but there's always room to move at your own level and to adapt and to have options. But no, more and more and more I'm finding they like to lead and have ownership of the material. So it's not all 5, 6, 7, 8, this is it. And I always say to them, and if you can't remember what it is, do whatever you think it is. It really doesn't matter. And they love that as well.
So that's the gain, isn't it? It's failure free. There's no wrong way of doing it.
Because I want to talk about choreography and creativity, which you've been talking about it since the beginning, as kind of being the core really of the practice. And I had some data actually, that I mentioned at the beginning, where the people dancing survey that I mentioned in that happened in 2016 point to dance with other people as a practice described as being overwhelming, creative and inclusive of a broad range of dance styles and forms. But then in the same time, there is a sense that sometimes we have to raise a higher profile for the body of practice developed within the wider framework of arts and older people in terms of choreography and creativity. So I was just kind of wondering what you think about, if we can reflect this idea of creativity when it comes to actually choreography and making work with other people on stage or not, or in different contexts where they're actually performer. It feels that this sense of intuitive choreography, intuitive creativity might get lost, and that is. We kind of go back to the representation of older people on stage. Is there something there? Does it chime with some of your experience?
So there's the open access classes which I lead, and they do not perform. They have no desire to perform. They just want to come and move. And then there's a company who do perform and who have to audition to be in that performance company. Okay, because they're performing in the Alexia Festival as well. They're performing, and it's not for everyone, you know. But there's something about each choreographer that they work with. They will have some taught materials and some unity, some little bits of unison, but within that there's always freedom to create their own materials, and they have solos and duets and trios. Very much like, it's actually not different to the way we work with our students. So there's something about that creativity that really comes to the fore, and they have to be really open for it and up for it. So if they make it in the audition, we make that really clear, and it's in their contract that they have to contribute creatively to the process.
Yes, because that will help with a sense of ownership. I feel if they've got an ownership of the material, if they've been part of creating it, then they will perform it in an embodied way. They'll perform it in a way they'll inhabit their bodies, and they won't do that frightened rabbit thing where they're just not sure what they're doing, which is painful to watch and not very nice to do. So I interviewed a couple of people for this, for my book, a couple of choreographers, and the one, I can't remember his name now, but he worked with Company of Elders, and he described how he has certain fixed points and certain periods of improvisation where it didn't matter how, they were just going from that fixed point where they maybe all turned and looked at the audience, and then they would go in their own way, but they knew that when they got to there, and I've picked up on this, and I've actually given a couple of cues. There might be a lighting cue and a sound cue, so that they know when they hear that and see that, that's when maybe everybody will reach their arms up or something, so that it has a structure, they're clearly performing as a group, but they're doing it in a way which is confident and they look like they're enjoying themselves. I think that is really important. So that thing about it not being heavily dependent on memory is really important for me. And also it's a question of aesthetics. It's actually really interesting to see work which isn't all unison, which isn't all set, which has an element. There's the choreography and there's the performance, and I think it's important to have the high standards of performance as well, that people actually do. We've done proper warm-ups, we've got movement which is, it's not on off, it's actually interesting to watch, but it doesn't have to be all set, because the more set it is, the more we have to remember. That really came home to me when we'd invited a guest choreographer to make a piece with us. The youngest of us was about 16 and the oldest was 73. And the 16, 17-year-olds, two of them, they had no trouble remembering it. We just did it, and she hadn't got, it wasn't all completely set, but the set bits we struggled with, those of us who were a bit older. We got it in the end. But
I think one of the key things is keeping the work simple. It can be more simple, it can be beautiful. There's this wonderful moment in Heading My Bag, Liz's piece, and they've all got high heels on, well, the women, and they're all dressed like, you know, in these leathers, as I said, and they've all got a big bag, and it's all about their baggage. So it's my bag, see, and they all go, and they march, da, ba, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they stop, and they just boldly look at the audience, and they eye the audience up and down, everything. But there's wonderful spaces. See this bag? See this bag here? And she's directed them, you know, with all the, and there's quite a lot of spaces in this bag, and then they start to talk about baggage, and it's very funny, and it's quite bawdy, a bit rude, it's hilarious. And then there's wonderful bits where it's still and quiet for quite a bit of time, a little bits of improvisation, and then they all powerfully say a sentence together. And it's just the build-up of it. But in the piece, there's still places, so it's not all, you know, go. And if one of them forgets something, forgets the cue, a line, the other one will cue them in. And, you know, it's...
Yeah, there's a sense of sharing.
It's a real... so it's very empowering for them. And to the best of my knowledge, none of them get worried about forgetting, because they all help each other out.
Well, I was interested to have you reflect on this, the idea of progression. How does the facilitator might evaluate that progression if it's happening? And I know that you have particular interest in developing strategy for meaningful measurement. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about what could be meaningful measurement of progression for older people?
Yes, when I saw your question, I made a little note. Well, first of all, I question why we need to measure progression. And I know that it struck a chord with me because you're the second person in a few months to actually, one of them was a job I was doing in Northumberland, and they wanted me to explain how I was going to show progression. And I did want to take a step back and say why. And I thought about it, and I need to ask a few more people who take part in my dance sessions, but I suppose, was it you that said people still need to have a sense of still learning something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we talked about that.
That's right, that's what we talked about.
That was
Yes.
kind of, you know, when I'm thinking about health as well and kind of well-being, there's a
Yes.
sense of, you know, we need to continue learning, you know, there's
Yes.
and encourage that. And for me, one of the barriers is that the learning stop at some point, like, you know, or one of the assumptions is that at some point you're not able to learn anymore. But I think it's that maybe the learning is different. Again, it's a variation of the, you know, we're not learning the same thing. We can't do physically the same thing. So, but what is it that we're learning?
Well, I've had a stab at it. So I think progression is becoming more confident in movement, developing more embodied movement. Feedback from participants is that they enjoy the fact that there's no wrong way of doing it. So I don't want to have some kind of linear thing where, you know, if you really work hard, you get better at doing this, that and the other. But if I look at progression in the years that I've worked with one local group in the Stockport area, the progression would be seen in their ability to improvise in structured settings, given a structure. And again, that structure is interesting. I mean, the challenge for me as a facilitator is how much structure to put in place and so on. But yes, their ability to make up their own dances, I guess. But I'm not sure. I need to discuss it with them. I'm not sure whether I do see that as progression. But that's only my personal take, because I don't particularly want stuff where they're all following Diane for an hour and a half. That's, you know. So for me, progression is when they do their own thing.
I echo all of those things in terms of their own expressivity and confidence to be able to come up with a new movement and explore and all of these things. But also for me, there is a measurement in that when some of the odd people come to me at the beginning, they're new to it, they're quite sort of round-shouldered, and maybe they've had knee replacements, hip replacements, and they're a little bit here. And one of the things that when I'm doing my improvisation, I always say shoulders down in the back and open chest, wide chest, open back. And I constantly will remind them of this. And they've actually come to me, and some of them have got osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, and their consultants have noticed they have grown.
Really?
Because I'm always emphasising the vertical alignment, and I know for myself from having a hip replacement, there was a time when I was like this and I didn't even realise that I wasn't keeping a straight back.
Great.
So there is a progression in sense of their posture, alignment, their
I can certainly see physical progression, and there's no question about that.
Absolutely. And some of them, you know, that I get them to stretch a lot, and I say, you're waiting for the kettle, you're brushing your teeth, stand on one leg, you know, do your foot exercises. And so physically there is that progression as well, which I think is really important, because if you are going to a dance or fitness or whatever you want to call it, class, you want to feel as if you're making some progress and not sort of, you know, there's a benefit.
Because I think psychologically, I think that sense of progression, that sense of continuing to learn in a different body is quite amazing.
Absolutely.
And this is what I see as one of the significance of that practice. Is
And
it allow people to accept and to find new ways of dealing, coping with the body and keep moving.
But also balance. I find it really important, because often people have had falls or have one fall and they have a fear of falling. My own mother-in-law, my own mother had this. And so they lose complete confidence in walking out or walking with a stride, you know, icy weather, whatever it is, because of a fear of falling. And so what I it's very gradual, encourage them. And now, and it used to be, you know, like stand on one leg, you know, oh, I'm not sure, I'll go and hold onto a chair, I'll go and hold onto the wall. And I often, not every week, but I often finish with a little improvisation after a cool down, where they're doing one leg, and their challenge is to do different things with their arms on one leg, different point, and they love it. Dance into some lovely purcell or handle or something. It's one of their favourite things. So there's something about that and they love it. Oh my gosh, I can do this now, I can do this now.
So there's definitely a sense of progression here.
Oh, absolutely.
What I hadn't thought about, it's just come back to me listening to you, an example of progression. This is 30 odd years ago. A lady said, "Dan, before we start, can I just tell everybody something? Before we did these things, I couldn't go into town because, you see, since I had my stroke, if I step off the curb, when I get to the other end, I'm worried I won't be able to step up again." And she was worried, and she said, "But these exercises, what we're doing, moving our legs, I've got more confident now, and I've been downtown, and my ears pierced." This is an 83-year-old who, and she reckons that was the dance that did it. I've not thought about that, so that was progression for her, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and big impact on her well-being,
on her life,
on her life, and who she thinks she is and she can do. Yeah.
Yes.
So
but the meaningful measurement it's about whose needs are we meeting. Any kind of measurement should be meaningful, and it's we're measuring whether we've achieved the aims, and who decides on those aims. Who decides on the aims of the session, because that's going to influence the way we measure it.
Yes.
And there's no right or wrong answer there, but is it the participants? Is it the person leading the session? Is it the funders? Is it the person who commissioned it from the funders? There's a lot of different chiefs in there, and whose version of success is the one we're going to go with.
I lead this class for Alzheimer's support, Movement for the Mind, and Bob, beautiful Bob, I'll try and say this without crying, beautiful Bob, hadn't spoken, never said a word, and used to say, lovely, he's got dementia, quite a lot of them are early onset, but he's a bit further on. They had to try and come up with a movement and action that began with the letter of their name. So I'll give an example like Pat is perfect, and we'd all say at the same time, Pat is perfect. And we went, Jenny is joyful, and it got to him, and he didn't, and we went round, and there's about 12 people, and I didn't want to leave him out. So before we went on to the next thing, I took him by the hands, and I went, Bob, I have one for you, like this, thinking, because they'd never heard, he didn't speak for about 9 months. And then he went, Bob is beautiful.
Did he?
And that was I was actually going to say that, and he said it before me. And he did this beautiful gesture like this, and that was just amazing. And I would have, if somebody told me that the leader of the group, Sandra, came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, that was so,
in terms of training, both of you, you've got a very good insight, Davy, in terms of the HE training. But I was thinking, what do you think should be happening? What kind of skills should the students develop? But more so, what kind of experience? How do we start sharing that life experience that you can only know by living it?
For the part of the community and arts module, teaching module here, dance facilitation, for the last 2 years I've brought in my elders, a group of 9 or 10 elders, and that's actually been one of the most popular, the most enjoyable, and the most profound impact upon them, really, working physically with them. And before, I used to bring in Fergus from Green Candle, for example, to give a lecture and do some physical, practical work with them, taking my students through the kinds of things he does with older people, which was great. Then I learnt from him and started doing my own classes back in 2015, and those 2 years I did the same. I, led, and I thought, how much better would it be if I actually brought my elders in, put it to them one day, and they're absolutely up for it. So I've done that for the last 2 years, and the students, it's very memorable for them, and hugely, it's a big eye-opener. I can't believe, I couldn't believe that they could, because I teach them very similar, and we joined in class, did technique class together, we did improv together, they made duets, we made a piece together in this 3-hour session, and I think our students were really surprised and challenged by how physically able and how creatively able they were. So I would like to see more of this somehow within the sector, more
partnership,
more partnership, more
Encounter,
collaboration, real collaboration, encounters, and meaningful encounters. Because we're an Asian society, you know, Asian is increasing, and a lot of our students are more increasingly so going into work in this area, dance and dementia, just dance with older people, dance and Parkinson's, whatever, and you know, they should be interacting with those groups.
I think it would be useful if they had facts about ageing, what is an inevitable part of ageing, and which things happen to some people but not others. And from a duty of care perspective, they do need to know how to facilitate warm-ups and lead sessions. It is different. There are all sorts of things about keeping people safe that they could do with knowing about. They could do with knowing about, for their future work, possible work, the different contexts in which dance with older people can take place. I mean, personally, an interest of mine at the moment is small dances. I'm actually running training courses and actually going into places where you don't have to always have a group. You could do a one-to-one with that person who is in bed. You could do a small, you can take your wireless music and all the rest of it. You could do a small little session in the conservatory with people. So the context in which it takes place and might take place, I think, are very valuable. And again, the choreography, which I've mentioned about allowing for the fact that memory might not be what it was, and also stamina might not be, but you can still do really interesting stuff. But on the other side, it is the duty of care side about managing. If the music and the ambience and everything inspires them to get up and they feel 16 again, they could really do themselves an injury there. So the actual person facilitating it needs to be aware. I remember once. This is one of the first groups I had. The youngest was 83 and the oldest was 101 in this particular group. And the music, it was in the olden days of reel-to-reel tape, and the music went over onto a jive piece before I got a chance to change it. And when I looked round, half the group were up jiving. And I was talking to my GP friend about that night. Yeah, and I said, I was just really concerned. He said, what were you worried about? I said, I'm worried about them popping the clogs in my dance session. And he said, well, from the age you told me they're really quite tough. He said, the thing that you've really got to think about is falls. And I've never forgotten that. That's 30 odd years ago. And you can do a really good warm-up seated, and then I can get people up one-to-one or in small groups so that I can actually keep an eye on them, as opposed to, I mean, these are probably more frail people than the ones that you brought in.
I think that sounds like they are actually,
But if we've only done this kind of session you saw, and then they accept a job in a care home, they might think it's perfectly okay to have everybody up at the same time. It might be, but might be is not good enough for me. I just think, I want to dance. Right, okay, come on, we'll have one-to-one. I'll be with you in a minute, Harry. Go on, we'll have a dance first. And actually, they don't all have to be moving all the time.
But it does come back to that idea of different abilities and how do we kind of lean from behind, but also kind of really being
I think
there
everyone working at their own level is so key. Always at your own level, at your own pace. Even with the walking improvisations, I mean, I was walking in grids with them. Imagine we're in New York, and then I was walking. They have to walk in circles, and S's and curves and whatever. But sometimes I get carried away, so I'll start walking quite sprightly, and I have to remember to say, and at your own pace. And some will go much more quickly, and others will totter a little bit, So it's always at your own pace, at your own level, So
we do, in the People Dancing Summer School, we run Leading Dance with Older People. As I say, there's a new online course it's an introduction to Leading Dance with Older People. And some universities, I'll do like a guest slot, but it is literally just a slot, but nothing, it doesn't sound like as thorough as yours. But no, I think it's a mixture of things. I think definitely hands-on. And what I've found valuable in the past has been where you've had a group of older people, you've perhaps done the practical stuff before. Now your older people sound reasonably mobile. You could also bring a group in and have a seated session, having prepared the students, and have them as co-leaders in it. Or they might actually lead just one activity. But you're there to keep it safe, but there's nothing quite to substitute for that. They've got their
experiential learning.
I think would be really valuable, and it would, it's intergenerational, and it would tick the boxes of local care settings and so on.
Yes.